magiling, dalas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manluluping, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mong bangaw, ay ginatang tula, awit sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang patawad mo'y tagumpay na naghihinig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidinig. Luman ang araw ng walhaging pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pagkay mga api, at mamatay ng dahil sa'yo. United architects of the Philippines are we, sworn to uphold our profession's dignity. Ours is to create, to design and plan, build a shelter for the family of man. As architects we build with artistry and vision, with humble hearts of vision and with dedication. Combine in strength, utility and beauty, in a simple house of compensation. One in heart and one in soul, all for one and one for all. These architects are the symbols of greatness, loyal to the UAP. We pledge to ourselves to serve our country with a fervent work, so let us all be architects with a Filipino soul.
I shall work with this general objective, that I am accountable to God, to Mother Earth, to my country, to my fellow men, and to myself. I shall uphold the ideals and follow the norms and ethical conduct of this noble profession. I shall pursue moral and professional excellence to the utmost level of integrity, through industrious dedication and meaningful application to my work, that merits a reputation for quality of services, worthy of fair remuneration. I shall pledge myself to the highest standard of professionalism in relation to clients, colleagues, industry partners, and society. I shall dedicate myself to the pursuit of creative endeavor towards the goal of enlightened art and science, generously sharing it. I shall respect the rights and works of my colleagues in the profession and confine my comments to constructive intents. I shall endeavor to do my duty in the protection of our common environment and the preservation of architectural heritage for the sake of the present and future generations. So help me God.
Ayan. Magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon at magandang gabi. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I could see that we have participants all the way from the Philippines, Oman, Kuwait, Dubai, Qatar, Brunei, Singapore, and the rest of the world. And of course, our members here in Australia and New Zealand. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. First is ensure that you have downloaded the virtual background before we formally open the webinar. The virtual background could be found in the WeTransfer link that was sent to all attendees. We are currently live on Facebook, and this webinar is also being recorded for documentation purposes. Please be reminded to change your username in a given format posted in the chat box. So if you can't see it, the format is first name, space, last name, underscore UAP Australia, or the UAP chapter that you belong to, or if you're not from the UAP, please just put it as underscore guest. And now the following procedure shall be observed during the virtual meeting. First is attire during the virtual meeting is business or casual, or as long as you're decent. Be aware of your surroundings and how you appear visually. A quiet location with no background noise and closed blinds, curtains, and windows so that you are easier to see in the video. To limit distractions and create additional noise, please ensure that you mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Be aware of your behavior because you are in a video conference, others can't see you and see what you are doing at all times. Follow all instructions in the video conferencing invitation and note important supplemental information such as the backup phone number in case you are disconnected. And lastly, note that a representative from UAB Australia Board of Directors will be taking screenshots of the participants every 15 minutes to record attendance. So those who will not comply with the internal procedures will not be issued a certificate of completion. Also, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the chat box. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So we would like to start this program through a prayer to be led by UAP Australia Chapter Auditor, Architect Romeo Vergara.
G'day, architects, and let us put ourselves in the presence of our dear Lord, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Lord, as we gather in your name, we humbly thank you for the gift of this experience. Grant our speakers the spirit of dialogue and illuminate our minds with the light of faith and truth. May this webinar encourage and help us to grow and develop our strength in our profession. We ask you to bless and protect us in our respective places in Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, and the rest of the world. We pray through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Yep, thank you, Architect Romeo. Now I would like to introduce Architect Emerald Ocampo, our UAP Australia Chapter Head for Professional Practice for the acknowledgement and the welcome remark. Architect Emerald.
Hi, good afternoon. Acknowledgement of the country. Let's start first by acknowledgement of the country. We begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. In the spirit of reconciliation, the United Architects of the Philippines Australia Chapter acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of peoples of today. Acknowledgement of guest speakers and guests. Architect Robert S. Sack, FUAP, ASEAN Architect, APEC Architect, Architect Nestor S. Mangyo, FUAP, ASEAN Architect, APEC Architect, members of United Architects of the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand Chapter, Board of Directors, UAP Chapter from Manila Atelier, UAP Singapore, UAP Alabang, UAP Chapter Capital, UAP Chapter Dubai, UAP Chapter Qatar, Baraswain, Brunei, Pangasinan, Manila Ilustrado, Balanga, UAP Chapter Kuwait, Oman, Diliman, and Cagayan North. A pleasant good afternoon to all, and welcome to UAP Australia's chapter's first webinar for this fiscal year. We are indeed pleased to be hosting this first UAP Australia chapter webinar that will discuss about remote practice and insight on architecture in the Philippines for Filipinos abroad, which will provide the knowledge of the Philippine market and opportunities, and to understand the legality to practice as architects, especially those former Filipinos who are now citizens of a foreign country. A lot of you who may be residing abroad and have uprooted your roots to rebuild your careers and personal lives will probably ask, is there any advantage to practicing architecture in the Philippines? What is the state of the Philippine economy now, given that we have this global pandemic? Can there be any opportunities available now for foreign practitioners or former Filipinos? We are very fortunate that two industry experts have accepted our invitation to share their knowledge on this matter. Firstly, Architect Nestor S. Mangyo will talk about the current climate, opportunities, and ancillary services that an architecture professional could practice within Philippine building industry. Architect Nestor S. Mangyo has built a multifaceted practice with design, construction, and real estate on his core businesses. And what better way than to have someone with his experience share insight on this opportunity? Furthermore, it is general knowledge that one has to be a Filipino citizen in order to practice in our profession in the Philippines, of course. But which brings us to the second part of this webinar, wherein Architect Robert S. Sack, who is the chairman of the Professional Regulation Commission Board of Architecture, will explain if there are any entitlements for a foreigner or former Filipino to practice in the Philippines. And what better way to hear than the facts straight from the chairman himself. Some of us may have already pledged allegiance to another country. However, the best way we could help the Philippines is to impart the experiences and knowledge gained in practicing abroad. We hope that you will stay throughout this event and participate in our Q&A session later. If you have any questions, please feel free to list them on the chat box, and our guests will endeavor to answer this question later on Q&A part. Once again, we thank both of our esteemed guest speaker, but most importantly, we wish to thank you all on behalf of UAP Australia Board of Directors for gracing this webinar. Let us acknowledge our two guest speakers, highly respected practicing architect in the Philippines, Architect Robert S. Sack and Architect Nestor S. Mangyo, for honoring our invitation to share and educate us on remote practice. We thank you for allocating your time and your tight schedule to be with us this afternoon via Zoom to discuss this important issue on Filipino architects based in overseas. Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Emerald, and welcome and thank you again to Architect Robert S. Sack and Architect Nestor Mangyo for accepting our invitation. And now to formally introduce our first guest speaker, Architect Nestor Mangyo, let's welcome our Chapter Vice President for Programs and Development, Architect Riza Arcilia. Architect Riza.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Architect Nestor Mangyo is the principal architect of his architectural firm and president of the NS Mangyo Construction and Development Corporation. He is the chairman and president of Central Country Estate Incorporated, his real estate development firm. He is a graduate of BS Architecture at the University of Santo Tomas and was once the president of its alumni association. An alumnus of the Graduate School of Design in Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts, USA, he took up advanced management and development program in real estate and was voted model student of his class. He started his United Architects of the Philippines journey by being a member of the Pampanga chapter and later founded the UAP Angeles chapter, where he became its founding president. He rose to become a regional director, a national treasurer, vice president for operations, and eventually the national president of UAP for 2 consecutive terms from 1994 to 1996. During his term as UAP national president, the organization hosted the Art Asia Congress in Manila. His administration turned over the seed money for the purchase of the lot of the UAP headquarters. He is a fellow of the UAP and Art Asia and an APEC architect. His Pascuhan Village design was awarded the Design Excellence by the UAP. He is a member of the American Institute of Architects. He was awarded Professional Regulations Commission Professional of the Year in 2006 for the field of architecture. He attended conventions abroad like the International Union of Architects, UIA, Art Asia, National Home Builders Association of America, Green Building Council, New Urbanism, Smart Communities, and the Urban Land Institute, where he was once one of its speakers. He went into allied services of the architectural profession. He is one of the pioneers of design and build services, and he's now in real estate property development. His most prominent project is the Lake Shore, a lake resort residential community in Pampanga. Architect Mangyo actually pioneered the lake resort community development in the Philippines. For the Lake Shore, he received numerous distinguished awards, some of which are Developer of the Year and Best Design Community, amongst others. Aside from his license in architecture, he is also a PRC licensed environmental planner, interior designer, and realtor. For government service, he was a former chairman of the Clark International Airport Corporation, chairman of the Subic-Clark Alliance Development Council, and a former director of the Bases Conversion Development Authority, Fort Bonifacio Corporation, and Clark Development Corporation. He was bestowed the Outstanding Kapampangan Award by the province of Pampanga, Outstanding Alumnus of Don Bosco Academy of Pampanga, Blessed Rinaldi Award of the Salesian of Don Bosco, and awarded the Medal of Honor by the International Real Estate Organization, FIABC, based in Paris. He is also a Thomasian awardee by the USD Alumni Association, Incorporated. This year, the UAP bestowed on him the highest award that the organization can honor its members, the Likha Gold Medal Award. He is only the 15th architect to be confirmed such distinguished honor in 42 years. May I please introduce to you the UAP Likha Gold Medal awardee for this year, Architect Nestor S. Mangyo.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Raisa, President Hazel Aguilar, and the other officers of UAP Australia and from New Zealand, fellow architects, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Raisa for inviting me to this webinar. When Raisa was in the Philippines, she was my technical assistant and business development officer, a beauty and brain asset to our firm. How I wish I am physically there with you so I could also have a chance to visit Sydney again. The last time I was there was in 2013. The COVID-19 pandemic and now the Delta variant has disrupted the world economy with its imposed lockdowns that even Australia and New Zealand was spared. The Philippine economy prior to the pandemic was enjoying an economic boom with growth rate of 6.8 GDP, and at one time even higher than China, or the highest in the ASEAN region. If you have been home lately, Metro Manila was already mushrooming with high-rise buildings, commercial and residential condominiums. The vacancy rate on the offices was only 3%, and the residential units were selling like hotcakes because of the rising upper middle class. Malls were being built almost near each other. Townships, communities, and industrial estates were being built in the countryside and other regions. The local architects were very busy and doing well. This was evident in the attendance of the UAP conventions, where thousands attended. But today, the economic boom is disrupted by the COVID-19 global pandemic. We are at war. It's not a war against nations, but war against an invisible enemy to the world. The enemy is an elemental foe without resources, army, or deadly weapons. There's no brain and direction. It strikes globally, anywhere and everywhere. But this war can still be won, not by an army or deadly weapons, but by social distancing, washing of hands, wearing face masks and shields, and getting vaccinated. The Philippine government targets to attain herd immunity in Metro Manila by December. These health protocols, however, takes a toll in the way we now live, our lifestyle and planning of our buildings, cities, and infrastructures. But this pandemic, like the other pandemics in history, shall also pass. Just like the bubonic plague in 1350 in Europe, where more than 200 million people died, in the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, of which more than 50 million died. President Thomas Jefferson of the United States, during the outbreak of the yellow fever in 1793, said, "It is the end of the cities." But it did not happen. Urbanization continued with densification. The Filipinos are very resilient in times of disasters or uncertainty. We survived the strongest storm on earth, the Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda in Leyte. The biggest volcanic eruption in 100 years, the Mount Pinatubo eruption, and the intensity 8 earthquake in Baguio, and even man-made disasters like the war on terrorism in Mindanao. The elements in winning this pandemic will surely make a mark in our design of structures, communities, and cities, and infrastructures. Architecture and planning will evolve and adapt the need of the times. We will just have to reboot the way we live, work, play, and study. Density. Is density the culprit in the spread of disease? Density used to be the benchmark for more projects or buildings and more housing to be built. But now it has become a threat to our health. Density has become the breeding ground of the coronavirus. Shall we then go back to lesser dense development or sprawl? This might not be feasible in urban centers because of the limited supply and high cost of land. Adaptation to health protocols will have an impact on the design and cost of our projects or development. The cost that will be passed on to the occupants or buyers will be enormous. In commercial buildings or office buildings, we are now required to practice physical distancing, which means more square meters of space per person is essential in the workplace. Again, this will have cost implications on our office space or acquisition cost of buyers or leasing of the commercial space. How are we to address physical distancing in the corridors, restrooms, and elevators? Shall we do low-rise or walk-up structures instead? There is now a need to have wider or one-way corridor and stairs and more open spaces on sites. Structures, aside from conforming to green and sustainability, can add more value to the projects by following the wellness standards for buildings. This relates to ventilation, quality of air, water, room temperature, light level, acoustic, and nourishment to promote health, well-being, and efficiency of occupants. All these factors will now be considered in adapting our plans and design to the new normal. In the Philippines, Metro Manila had the most cases and deaths due to COVID-19, being one of the world's most densely populated metropolitan area. It has a density of around 43,000 people per square kilometer. As sprawl in urban centers is very costly, unless the project is high-end, the solution is to do sprawl or new towns in the suburbs or the countryside. Where land is less expensive, more open spaces and greenfields can provide a natural setting. We can segregate the different housing types in our development, making it inclusive at the same time. This augurs well with this administration's program of Balik Provincia to decongest and decentralize Metro Manila. With remote working and studying from home, living farther from our workplace or school is now feasible. If you need to go to your office or school in Metro Manila, with the construction of the connector road to NLX, SLX, and Cavitex, you can now be in the city in less than an hour. With the new SMC Skyway, for example, you can now travel from Balintawak to Buendia in 17 minutes instead of the usual 1 to 2 hours travel time. There's now a bridge that connects Mandaluyong in Reliance Street to BGC 8th Avenue, and you can travel BGC to Shaw Boulevard in 5 minutes. There's also a connector road being constructed from NLX to SLX and Cavitex by the Metro Pacific Group. Architecture and urban planning will play a crucial role in designing a better, safer, healthier, and more livable built environment. House plans will be influenced by the new normal of working, studying the comfort of your home. We can create more value to our residential plans by providing studios for working and studying, isolation room, and multimedia room, since we've gotten used to watching movies and other shows at home due to lockdowns. These homes should be digitally connected with high-speed internet. The ideal sites for remote working are the suburbs of urban centers or the Calabarzon area, Pampanga and Central Luzon, and some other growth areas like Bicol, Cebu, Iloilo, Bacolod, and Davao. For us architects, this is an opportune time to design residential units which are farther from the city and more affordable. The mantra of work from home, study from home, definitely requires a home for the family. Work from home will be a permanent institution for some companies, especially the banking sector, due to cashless transactions like e-wallet. Provisions for health protocol requirements will now add premium to our projects and benefit our clients. The practice of architecture has gone beyond being creative. We have bigger responsibilities in our design. We need to have ecological conversion to incorporate sustainability in our design and help mitigate climate change. To have smart designs, embracing the new and future technology. Very important today is the design of our buildings to conform to wellness standards. Our design should be resilient and flexible in times of calamities and should be future-proof. Today, architects are talking about generative design in architecture. Generative design is the concept of allowing a smart artificial intelligence that works inside the CAD and CAE software. Some control of the design process. It takes what computers are good at, making a multitude of calculations and developing many possibilities, all at once, math problems, and mixes that with human choices and influence. Architects continue to find innovative ways of making things within the realm of their own discipline by giving the computer specific constraints and letting it do the bulk of work to the design process. The generative algorithms works out a plethora of choices. We can now check thousands of different design options quickly instead of us manual sketching in our pad and coming up with several studies. Architects can instruct the computer by giving specific parameters to produce design outputs. But the concept design portion of the project must primarily remain under the control of the humans. Architects are visionaries when given a site. The architect see the best and highest use of the site. But vision without action is nothing. I've always adhered to the mantra I used when I ran for the UAP presidency: more than vision, action. This is the reason why I advocated for architects to practice design and build services so that their vision can be translated into actual edifice and still augment their income. In my previous talks to architects, I always tell them to have an entrepreneurial spirit in their design, aside from being creative. You have to consider the return of investment of the clients and not only on the aesthetic or functionality of the buildings. I showed our members how to do feasibility studies as an added value to our services. I believe I was one of the pioneers of design build services among architects, which I started almost 50 years ago. You may ask what encouraged me to go into design and build and eventually into real estate development. I started my architectural services before I took the board licensure exam. At that time, I needed 2 years of experience before taking the board. I started designing and doing the working drawings for an engineer. When I finished the drawings, I tried to collect the payment per sheet. The engineer said, "My rate is too expensive." He said, "It's just a paper, but the charge is more expensive than jewels." That challenged me on how I could augment my income aside from our practice. I started my design and build services by designing the layout of vinyl tiles in the master bedroom and doing an optical display window. When I passed the board exam, I started designing houses for my 2 brothers. Normally, your first clients are your relatives. I began doing design build of residences and then commercial buildings. And in 1989, I got a license for contractors so I could build bigger projects. At the same time, build on other architects' works. Eventually, as projects got bigger, I was given a AAA license, the highest category for contractors. Recently, I finished a design and build for 120 luxury townhouses of San Miguel Corporation. And now I am constructing 4 towers with a podium of federal land designed by other architects. And I won the project through bidding. Leading into real estate development. My construction projects gave me capital to land banking and develop lands into individual residences, townhouses, and subdivisions. Our trophy project, from which Raisa was once a part of it, is the Lakeshore Residential Lake Resort Community. We saw this idle land in Mexico, Pampanga, and wanted to master plan something different from the existing communities. We pioneered the development of the first community with a 12-hectare man-made lake. Some skeptic engineers told me that I could not do a lake because the soil in the area is sandy or lahar-based. I studied how I could keep the water. The solution was to line the whole 12-hectare lake with a high-density plastic lining. I timed the filling of the lake with water with an incoming typhoon, and the lake was filled in a week's time. Today, after 20 years, people enjoy the lake by fishing, boating, kayaking, or relaxing by the lake. Families go on picnics, especially on weekends. We bought trees that were supposed to be cut because they were in the right of way of an expressway. We had instant mature trees by the lake, and people walk and jog the tree-lined lakeside promenade. Because of the new lifestyle of living by the lake, we attracted buyers of the middle and high-end market. Today, we have done 13 gated villages and commercial lots on the 300-hectare lakeshore estate. To contribute to the 6 million housing shortage of the government, our company embarked on affordable housing with prices ranging from 2.8 million to 5 million. Even at this time of pandemic, our houses and lots sell because our buyers are mostly from abroad or overseas Filipino workers in the rising middle income society. Our development has raised the bar in property development. It has won several awards, including Best Design Community, Developer of the Year, and even an international award by the Federation of Real Estate Associations, or FIABSI, based in Paris. The key to this entrepreneurship is to be driven, innovative, explore allied services, and be honest and sincere in the practice of your profession. Your track record will get you the next project. We are very fortunate because even during these difficult times of global pandemic, our industry and profession have weathered or at least survived the challenges brought about by economic devastation. To be resilient to this kind of disruptions, we need to plan for flexibility and adaptability in our design. Structures that can be transformed to evacuation centers, temporary housing, quarantine and isolation rooms or buildings, and healthcare facilities. Office spatial planning will require more space for physical distancing. Infrastructures will have to apply physical distancing, like wider sidewalks, provisions for pedestrians, bike and motorcycle lanes, especially when public transportation is disrupted. Metro Manila has implemented and installed bike lanes in its major roads. Mixed-use developments are highly recommended to encourage walking and short-distance driving. A good example of this is the new Clark City, which is a 9,450-hectare property beside Clark. The government has started to build the sports facilities, housing, and office buildings when it hosted the Southeast Asian Games in 2019. Today, the facilities have been converted to quarantine and isolation rooms for the arriving OFWs and COVID-19 patients. This city will be the new megapolis, and government offices have already begun to relocate in the area. It will be the new megapolis, but avoiding the mistakes of Metro Manila, especially on traffic, pollution, overpopulation, and proliferation of informal settlers. It will be a safe and healthy place to live. We should build not only smart cities, but smarter and future-proof cities. Buildings, communities, and infrastructures should be well lit. Cameras installed to monitor safety, health, and also impending disasters. For the old and existing buildings, they should be retrofitted to conform to new health protocols of distancing, minimal contact, and higher hygiene standards so that people will feel safe re-entering them. What projects are winners in this time of pandemic? For us architects, planners, and developers, there are opportunities in times of pandemic. The winners in times like these are countryside residential developments, houses with new features, offices will rebound and still be in demand in the Philippines, especially for BPOs or business processing outsource and POGOs, Philippine offshore gaming operators. Remote working, flexi time, social distancing will influence spatial planning of office buildings and residential units. The others are hospitals and healthcare facilities, food takeout, supermarket and groceries, specialization on home deliveries, digital or information technology companies, telecom, media sectors, industrial parks for warehousing or for online shopping or e-commerce, logistic companies, factories for manufacturing of pharmaceutical and food products, utility companies, and insurance, agribusiness requirements such as cold storage, inventory, and memorial parks. With the advent of online shopping, I don't think it will be the demise of the brick and mortar retail stores or shopping malls. For Filipinos, malls will still be popular because of our culture and climate. We utilize them as our air-conditioned theme parks. Outdoor and open air malls will also emerge popular in this time of pandemic. Design and planning will prioritize health protocols. Many companies will make more money in times of pandemic, like affordable housing developers, pharmaceutical firms, healthcare facilities, manufacturers of essential goods, telecommunication and logistic companies. Some companies are fortunate even in times of pandemic. Ayala Land increased its income by 34% compared to first half of last year. Boydis and 8990 real estate companies posted higher sales too as compared to last year. This is mainly due to sales in new horizontal housing developments. Our backlog in housing is now 6 million. The Philippines is forecasted to recover ahead of its neighboring countries. The key driving force for the resumption of growth are the rapid vaccination rollout, the biennial stimulus package of 200 billion pesos, tax relief and tax cuts, moratorium on loans, soft or low interest loans, ease of doing business, relaxation of some rules and regulations in government permits and licenses, support to MSMEs or micro, small, medium enterprises, build projects in our strong peso currency. The government has allotted around 8 trillion pesos to build infrastructures, roads, bridges, airports, seaports, and railways. The Duterte administration allocated these trillions to finish all the build infrastructures. These infrastructures supply many real estate properties that are ripe for development. These properties gave way to transport-oriented development, TOD, for townships, commercial and residential buildings, hotels, and industrial estates. These projects benefited our architects at home. According to Colliers, a leading diversified professional services and investment management company, the Philippine economy contracted by 9.5% in 2020, the country's worst economic performance since the Second World War. For this year, the economy is projected to grow positively at 4.5% GDP, gross domestic product. Undeniably, COVID-19 affected our economy, especially our working class. It's good the government allocated 200 billion to pay ayuda to our workers in times of lockdowns. Office leasings remains challenging, with vacancy rate reaching 9.1% in 2020 from 4.3% in 2019. Condominium pre-sales reached the lowest since 2013. Hotel occupancies only hovered around 20%, as foreign arrivals declined by 82% in 2020. While vacancy across malls in Metro Manila reached 14% in 2020 due to lockdowns and health protocols. The spending on the trillion peso funded build infrastructure projects of the government is the principal driver of economic activity. Another major accomplishment of the Build project is the completion of the Clark International Airport, which will be the most modern airport in the Philippines, with contactless features or check-ins and ordering food, is set to open by October this year. OFWs have a special airport lounge, free of charge. Despite COVID-19's disruption to the Philippine property market, property developers continue to develop, anchored on the government's plan of ramping up infrastructure development. Developers' strategy is to land bank in periphery and suburbs of Metro Manila, to decentralize from the urban center. The Asian Development Bank says 55% of Asian population will be urban by 2030. We foresee the expansion of mixed-use developments outside the National Capital Region, expansion of industrial hubs, given the resurgence of the manufacturing sector and the rising demand for warehouses. I was listening to Dr. Bernie Villegas, an economist, who discussed about moving forward in the new normal. He pointed out that many growth areas of the country, he said, Central Luzon will be the next national capital region because of the existence of the new Clark City, Clark International Airport, Subic Port, and expressways. He also mentioned Calabarzon area, Davao, Iloilo, Bacolod, and even Bicol. It is very important to know where our next projects will be. We're studying the market, the economic outlook, in the new normal. The domestic and overseas market will continue to buy houses. The OFW, our modern day heroes, remitted $33.2 billion last year, just 0.8% lower than the $33.5 billion pre-pandemic remittance. And last June, remittance was $2.74 billion, higher by 7.6% from last year's June remittances. The Philippines recovery is propelled by 1. OFW remittances, 2. Rapid vaccination rollout, 3. The create low or reduce income tax, number 4 is low interest rate, 5. English-speaking young population, 6. Rising upper middle class, 7. Domestic consumption fueled by the OFWs, natural resources in agriculture, mining, and tourism. Number 9, geographic location. And number 10, direction spending, which will be in May next year. One of the economic stimuli that our government has programmed for real estate industry is for the banks to increase the real estate cap on bank loans from 20% to 25%, which means there is an available of 1.2 trillion pesos funds for architects projects. The government is aware of the fact that real estate, design, and construction are a stimulus to the economy, having a multiplier effect of 17 times, meaning for every project that has started, there are 17 industries that will derive business from it, like professionals, construction materials, manufacturing, labor, banking, food, transportation, utility companies, and so on. In this century, the ASEAN countries will dominate the world economy because of the large population and domestic consumption. whereas before it was Europe and then North America. If not only for the pandemic, the Philippines was set in 2020 to graduate from a poor middle-income economy to upper middle-income economy country. This is still attainable by 2023. Late in November 2019, Oxford Economics ranked the Philippines as number 2 among the 10 leading markets that will dominate the global economy in the next decade. India number 1, Indonesia number 3, China number 4. The Philippine economy remains bright despite the dark clouds created by the pandemic. Recovery is projected in the later part of 2022. In the new normal, we should come up with short-term survival, but with long-term solutions and growth. Let us pivot our profession laterally, evolve and innovate on our existing capabilities, and come up with new services addressing clients' present needs. For the architectural profession, particularly service-oriented professions, we should come up with new models of business. Digital transformation is a must for us to be sustainable and relevant. Promote our services and products locally and globally through digital technology. Introduce new products or services through Zoom meetings, webinars, virtual tour, and the social media. In closing, to go back to our pre-COVID economic activity, let us plan our re-entry and think beyond the pandemic. Let us flatten the curve, but not the economy. Thank you, stay safe, and good day. Mabuhay ang mga arkitektong Filipino.
Thank you very much for the very informative and eye-opening presentation, Architect Mangyo. We know our participants have learned a lot, not only about architecture, but also its correlation to real estate and our country's economy. Moving on, let's welcome Architect Lini Grace Conel to introduce our next guest speaker, Architect Robert Esta.
Hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our second speaker for today. Our guest speaker was born in Lalo, Cagayan, Philippines, where he spent his younger years. He excelled and was consistently at the top of his class, graduating as valedictorian for both elementary and high school. He studied at Adamson University in Manila, where he earned his degree in Bachelor's of Science in Architecture. He was recognized as the most outstanding alumnus in the arts by his alma mater and was later given the Adamsonian Award, the most prestigious honor that the institution could grant an alumnus. He became the chapter president of UAP Manila Metro Chapter in 1992. He marked his way up through the organization and rose from ranks to become the 17th UAP National President for fiscal years 2002 to 2004. It was in these 2 terms as national president, with the full cooperation of other industry associations such as the Philippine Institute of Architects, the Architects Advocacy International Foundation, and the Council of Deans and Heads of Architecture Schools in the Philippines, that Republic Act 9266, more commonly known as the Architectural Law of 2004, was passed into legislation. The Act stipulates that only licensed architects could sign and seal architectural plans and requires all licensed and registered Filipino architects to become the member of an integrated and accredited professional organization of architects in IAPOA. In 2002, he was awarded the Outstanding Cagayano Award for Leadership and Excellence in Business by the province of Cagayan. His extensive experience in local and international trade relations with his exemplary entrepreneurial and management skills were further recognized with his appointment as a member of the Philippine Monitoring Committee of the Asia Pacific Economic Council, or APEC, from 2003 to 2004. The following year, he was named Honorary Secretary of ARC Asia, the council overseeing all architectural organizations in Asia. In 2009, he was recognized as one of the 10 outstanding professionals by the Philippine Federation of Professional Associations of PFPA. In 2013, he was awarded Outstanding Professional of the Year for Architecture by the PRC for exemplifying the highest degree of professional competence and integrity in the architectural profession, for his selfless dedication in shaping high standards and values of the architectural practice, for sharing his expertise with peers in various organizations, and for his stewardship role in promoting social responsibility through meaningful participation and contribution in social-related activities. Having actively served his professional organization and his love for the architecture profession in various capacities, he became the 17th chairman of the Professional Regulatory Board of Architecture and president of the Foundation of Outstanding Professionals of the Philippines. Currently, he is the chairman of the PRC, Professional Regulatory Board of Architecture, the Professional Regulatory Authority for Architects in the Philippines, which conducts the licensure examinations. He is the current alternate chairman of the CPD Council for Architecture, a government body under the PRC that implements, monitors, and manages the continuing professional developments of architects in the Philippines. He is also the current alternate chairman of the CPSP CATS for Architecture, a government body under the PRC that manages the implementation of the career progression and specialization for architects, as well as implement the credit accumulation and transfer system for architect professional growth in the Philippines. Amongst many other key roles, he is also the president of RSAC and Associates Incorporated, a family-owned corporation with interest on construction and project management. He is the principal of Robert Sack Architectural Design and is also the president of Supra Steel Corporation. Having said all these, and with many more notable recognitions and roles, made him become one of the most distinguished and most decorated architects of his generation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming architect Robert Samoy Sack, FUAP.
Thank you, Lini, for that very generous introduction.
Welcome.
That's really beyond my expectation. It would have been enough that you mentioned and emphasize I'm the chairman of the Board of Architecture, because that is the best qualification for me to speak before you for the topic assigned by your chapter to me. Pag sinabing siya yung chairman of the Board of Architecture, tingin ko wala nang mas mataas pang iba na magiging speaker nyo when we talk about the practice of architecture. May boss ako sa PRC at isang arkitekto at alam nyo yon, si Architect Yolanda Reyes. Pero nasa taas na yon, commissioner na siya. And so, pagdating sa architecture and the practice of architects in our country, I think you have invited the right person to talk something of interest to you. So, maraming salamat sa invitasyon ng inyong chapter, UAP Australia chapter. Sa simula, sabi nyo, this is your first webinar. But so far, sa pakikinig ko sa inyo, it looks like we have been holding several seminars or webinars in the past. Gagaling nyo so far. Ang gandang makinig sa inyo. You speak with authority at parang you have already conducted hundreds of webinars, hindi lang iisa. Now, so I'm here to talk about the rules governing former Filipino professionals wanting to practice their profession in the Philippines. And so, obviously, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito would be those architects among you and among us who had been issued with the certificate of registration and professional identification card as Filipino professionals moved to other countries, or not necessarily moved to other countries, but importantly, had acquired new citizenship. I was asked last time, because I'm sure some of you may not be of foreign citizenship yet, kung paano naman yung mga Filipinos, still Filipinos and their citizenship remains as Filipinos, yet they're based in the outside of the country. Ang sagot ko ay simple lang, nothing has changed. Parehas lang yun nung nandito kayo sa Pilipinas. So the rules that governs that is exactly the same as if you are still here. So let's then focus because of the limitation on time to this topic on how Filipino professionals who have already acquired a foreign citizenship can practice in the Philippines. Yes, you mentioned earlier too that we practically are all aware that under the Philippine Constitution, specifically Section 14, Article 12, prescribes and limits the practice of professions in our country among Filipino citizens only. But there is a very important note in that section of Article 12, and there are exemptions. And if there are laws that prescribe and allow the practice of foreign professionals, they can do that and invoke such law. And in our country, there is such a law, and this is RA number 8981, or this is what we call the PRC Modernization Law. And the PRC Modernization Law allows the practice of foreign professionals in our country, and that includes also under a provision of our law, RA 9266, allows likewise the practice of foreign professionals under the provisions of our under the reciprocity provision of our law and under the special temporary permit or STP provision of 8981 or PRC modernization law. Next slide. But there are indeed individuals, eventually probably you will fall onto these type of individuals who have been registered and licensed as professionals while still Filipinos, but had already acquired foreign citizenship. And so, as I said, this is the subject of our discussion this afternoon. Next slide. So specifically Section 7, I of Republic Act 8981 or the PRC Modernization Law provides that professionals who were former citizens of Philippines who had been given or issued pasensya na, akala ni Alexa siyang kausap ko. Sumasagot si Alexa. Kasali si Alexa kasi dito sa webinar natin. So let me go on. So as I said, Section 7, specifically Section 7I of RA 8981, or this is the PRC Modernization Law, allows the Filipino professionals who were given or issued certificate of registration and the PIC prior to their naturalization as foreign citizen, while in the country on a visit or permanent residence to practice their profession. So pwede under these two new law. I mentioned a while ago, RA 9266 and that is under the reciprocity provision of our law, as well as yung STP provision of our law, and under RA 8981, Section 7. Certificate of registration and PICs, don't mistake it as the same. These are two different documents. The certificate is registration. Ito yung malaki at usually nilalaminate nung panahon namin yan at binibitin sa pader. So yun yung COR. While the PIC, ito yung maliit, parang lisensya na dala-dala ninyo palagi. At yan ang kumbaga nagbibigay ng bragging rights nyo sa mga ibang professionals. The core, by its nature, is permanent. Hindi ito nag-expire. Walang expiry, ang certificate of registration. And just to educate you, because many of our fellow architects don't understand it, or is not aware, or are not aware of it, yan ay permanente na yan, lifetime. Okay, so you will be called architects even if you have an expired professional identification card. It is the PIC that expires every 3 years, but never the certificate of registration. Kaya yung nakasabit sa pader ninyo, permanente na yon. Ang nag-expire lang ay yung ibinubulsa ninyo. But these two documents issued to a Filipino professional allows him to practice his profession in the Philippines as long as this, even if he has already acquired new citizenship, as long as this core and the PIRC are issued to you before your naturalization, subject to certain conditions. Mamaya, yun ang pag-usapan natin as we move on. But at least at this point, very clear na sa inyo na dalawang batas ang nagsasabi na pwedeng mag-practice ang foreign professionals in our country. While Section 7 of RA 8981 is very specific, it allows Filipino professionals issued with core and PIC prior to their acquisition of new citizenship can practice their profession in the Philippines under certain conditions. Okay, so next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. So, ano yung conditions ng Section 1? Section 7, I should say, Section 7I of RA 8981. It says that you should be issued with a special permit and updated PICs by the Professional Regulatory Board of Architecture. If you are an architect, other boards will issue you kung iba naman yung iyong profession. And these are, of course, the SP or special permit, which we issue, the Board of Architecture issue, is, of course, usually it's approved and must be approved, I should say, by the Commission. When we talk of Commission, we are referring to the PRC, Commission proper. And of course, of importance, of great importance para sa ating gobyerno, bayad yung permit at saka yung annual registration fees ninyo. You will note a while ago that ang sabi ng ating Constitution, Filipino lang ang pwedeng mag-practice ng kanyang profession. Maliban lang kung may mga ibang batas, may ibang batas nagsasabing po pwede. And I mentioned dalawa ang batas na pumapayag, nagbibigay pahintulot sa mga Filipinos or foreigners na mag-practice sa atin in the Philippines by the provision of reciprocity at saka yung STP. Pansinin nyo, kanina is merong T, no? STP. STP means spatial, yung T, temporary permit. Because the STP applies to all foreigners, irrespective whether a Filipino or you are not a Filipino. However, note that itong RA 8981, Section 1I, speaks of SP. So, spatial permit, nawala yung temporary. So, yun yung pagkakaiba. When you apply as a foreigner coming to our country, bibigyan ka ng STP pag you are qualified by the Board of Architecture. Pero kung dati kang may hawak ng COR, updated na Professional Identification Card, at ikaw ay isang Filipino, at this score and PICs were issued to you before you became a citizen of other country, ang ibibigay sa iyo is SP, special permit, kasi special kayo. So that's why SP, can you imagine? Kaya that should encourage you to come and practice because special kayo pagdating sa PRC. You're given that special permit and it's not temporary. So yun, importante. Because marami yung hindi nakakalam, akala nila lagi STP. STP, that applies to all foreigners, irrespective of their citizenship. Pero pag Filipino ka, foreigner ka na dahil meron kang foreign citizenship, ang ibibigay sa iyo, SP, special permit, dahil special kayo, wala na lang yung T. Tinanggal yung temporary. But as I said, I have to overemphasize, kailangan bayad kayo. Yung permit, binayaran nyo yung permit at binabayaran nyo rin yung annual registration fees. So, hindi temporary. Special yung permit nyo. Kasi pag sinabi namin kasi special temporary permit, may validity yan. The board sometimes gives 6 months. 1 year, 2 years, more often 1 year to 2 years, but usually ang maximum yan until the completion of the project. But kayo hindi, special permit kayo. As long as you are registered and you are paying yung annual registration fee prescribed under your SP, tuloy-tuloy yung permit nyo. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, here's the procedure in filing and processing of the applications for issuance of SP. So ang unang step, file the special permit application sa RD, Regulation Division of PRC. So anyway, we can move quicker here. Nasa inyo naman na yung slide ko, but please don't move to the next slide yet. Okay, balik. But I'm just saying, mamaya, pwede kong bilisan. Anyway, meron kayong kopya nitong PowerPoint ko. You can request copies later on sa mga organizers ng webinar na ito. So you can have a copy of this. So ang first step, mag-file kayo ng special permit application sa RD of PRC. Ang mga kailangan na documents are your old PRC Certificate of Registration at saka yung old na PIC. Huwag niyong wawalain yung PRC nyo na core. Pabayaan nyo na yun na nakabitin lagi doon sa pader, no? Para hindi mawala. At yung PIC ninyo, kahit nag-expire na yan at hindi nyo nire-renew dahil wala kayo dito sa ating bansa, huwag nyo rin walain because you can use this and they are required when you file for special permit. Certificate of Registration, yung sinasabit sa pader, yung PIC, yung dinadala sa bulsa. Okay, next slide. Certificate of Employment at saka yung proof of compliance of the CPD requirement. Bakit kailangan itong ito. Anyway, one of these is required. Either the certificate of employment or the compliance to CPD. At take note that that certificate of employment clearly states na yung trabaho nyo is work-related sa inyong profession bilang arkitekto. Okay? Hindi po pwede na yung work certificate ninyo or certificate of employment, ang trabaho nyo nag-fishing lang. No? Because it has nothing to do with your profession as an architect. Kailangan related yon. And that kung hindi ganon, hindi naman ganon yung hanap buhay ninyo, kailangan lang meron kayong proof of compliance of the CPD. PRC and the Board of Architecture just want to make sure na hindi kayo nawala sa practice or sa required knowledge and updating of knowledges pagdating sa practice ng inyong profession. Ang hirap naman kung napunta na kayo sa ibang bansa, iba na yung hanap buhay ninyo, hindi pa kayo nagsi-CPD. Delikado naman. Kawawa naman yung mga Pilipino kung ang mga kliyente nyo dito sa atin ay mga kapwa natin Pilipino. Because ibig sabihin na detached na pala kayo sa practice ng ating profession. And that's why this requirement is important. But you see, kung hindi yung hanap buhay nyo, hindi related to the practice of architecture, related sa practice ng profession natin, siguraduhin nyo lang na nagpo-comply kayo ng CPD requirement because that is proof na updated pa rin kayo pagdating sa technologies, sa application of for the application of our practice of our profession. The other one, proof of citizenship. Ito na yung bago nyong citizenship. Then number 4, certificate with or with no pending case. No? You'll see that pwede kayong may pending case. That's not an issue. It does not really disqualify you immediately for having an SP, special permit. But we need to know, you have to be transparent to the Board of Architecture by providing us a certificate of with or without pending case. And other document required is, of course, the proof of payment of the processing fee. Next slide. Now, step 2. Nag-file na kayo ng SP application nyo, then the RD or Registration Division will forward your application and the other documents na pinag-usapan natin kanina to IAW. IAW is International Affairs Office, specifically yung Qualification Recognition Division. Doon dadalhin yung ng RD yung application nyo kasama yung mga documents which we have discussed earlier. And the QRD, yung Qualification Recognition Division, will endorse all these documents after their assessment to the Board of Architecture. Again, to the Board of Architecture, for those who are architects, mamamaya may mga kasama tayo dito sa webinar na mga accountants biglang pumunta sa Board of Architecture. So when I say I talk of the board, I am referring to the Board of Architecture. Next slide. Step number 3. The board, through the focal person, shall act on the application based on the submitted documents. Note of that focal person. Sa amin, you will note that there are, currently, there are only 2 members of the Board of Architecture. And currently, ang focal person for the board is Architect Robert Mirafuente. So siya yung tatanggap galing sa step 2 at siya yung mag-assess. He is the person initially to assess your application. And of course, eventually, Kasi at the end of the day, dadaan pa rin naman sa akin as chairman of the Board of Architecture before I sign this SP. But that will be discussed, I think, somewhere on the later part. So step 4, the focal person shall recommend the approval of the application if the documents are all in order. So yun yung sinasabi ko kanina, na siya yung between the two of us, Robert Perofente and myself, kasi dadalawa lang kami, siya yung initial evaluation and then recommend this application if sa tingin niya ay kompleto na yung mga dokumento. Next slide, step number 5. Ang step number 5 is that EAW QRD shall request applicant to proceed to the Licensure Registration Division, or we call it LRD, for the updating of his or her PIC. So, yung aplikante will now have to, because he will be advised by the Licensure Registration Division, yung applicant should proceed to have his PIC updated. Chances are, kung nasa ibang bansa kayo, hindi nyo nire-renew lagi yung PIC nyo, then there is a need to have your PIC updated. So, kailangan kayong pumunta sa Licensure Registration Division. Step 6, EAW, upon the receipt of the proof of PIC updating, shall prepare the SP certificate for the signature of the board chairperson and the commission chairperson. So dalawa, no? Pag na-update na yung PIC nyo, na yung core nyo naman, mapansin nyo kanina, mulat-mula sabi namin, pwede kayo magkaroon ng SP, basta meron pa kayo yung core ninyo, certificate registration, updated na yung PIC nyo. Okay. So, kanina, we talked that step 6, na-update na yung PIC nyo, then EAW already prepares your SP certificate para mapirmahan ko as chairman of the board at pipirmahan din ito ng chairman ng commission ng PRC. So dalawa yung pipirma ng special permit nyo. Next slide. Step 7, okay. EAW upon receipt of the signed SP certificate will submit service request form to the ICT or DMS, ICT DMST for inclusion of your name in the database of former Filipino professionals. That's why we will not SP ang bibigay sa inyo, special permit. Yan ay usually as long as you are paying you have paid the permit fees and then you are paying your annual permit, annual dues, then your SP continues to be effective. Dahil ilalagay na yung pangalan ninyo sa PRC database ng mga former Filipino professional. So, meron kayo group in PRC, list of former Filipino professionals issued with special permit. Yung ICT is, this is the technology division of the PRC. Ang complete ng ICT is Information and Communication Technology Service. So yun yung ICTS. DMS, I think, Data Management Services Division. Okay. So dadalhin ngayon yon ng EAW para maisama na kayo sa database ng PRC doon sa database ng former Filipino professionals. And step 8 is that EAW, once na ilagay na yung pangalan nyo sa database ng mga former Filipino professionals, will now issue to you the SP certificate to practice profession, but it will issue pag nabayaran nyo na yung permit fee. So magkakaroon na ulit ng isang certificate, parang kasinlakihan ng CORE, Certificate of Registration. O meron nang itatabi ulit sa pader. So dalawa na yung nasa pader ninyo. Yung pader ng CORE at yung certificate na CORE, nasa pader, itabi nyo ulit yung certificate na special permit. So maswerte kayo talaga. Dalawa yung pwede nyo ilagay sa pader. Kami, isa lang. So kayo, pwedeng dalawa. So that's, you see, you are always special. So yan ang ating sistema. Okay, next slide. Now let's talk about the application for PRC renewal of those professionals who reacquired Philippine citizenship. Kasi meron tayong mga ganun sitwasyon. Meron tayong mga sitwasyon na mga Filipino professionals o Filipino architects pumunta sa ibang bansa, nag-acquire ng new citizenship, but after a while, pero pag medyo nagkakaedad na, nagsasawa na siya sa bansa na kung saan siya naka-acquire ng new citizenship, sabi, uwi na ako at doon ako sa Pilipinas mag-retire. Tapos maganda doon sa Pilipinas. I have friends who did that. Bumalik sila. When they came back, they reacquired their Philippine citizenship and they also reacquire yung kanilang PIC. You will note that again, here, we are only talking of the PIC renewal. PIC. Walang renewal ng Certificate of Registration. I said that from the very beginning. That core, hanggat buhay kayo, may valid pa rin yung core. But in the Philippines, kahit valid pa yon, hindi nag-expire yung core nyo, kung expired naman yung PIC nyo, under, of course, our law, RA 9266, at saka National Building Code of the Philippines, hindi ka makapag-practice. So, when you say makapag-practice sign and seal documents, architectural documents, and other documents needed for building permitting, na hindi current ang hawak-hawak mo na PIC. So, I'm sure there is a need to have a different time to talk about yung core at saka yung PIC. Because obviously, I said a while ago, your core is not exactly the same as your PIC. I said a while ago, pag may core ka, kahit na yung PIC mo ay expired na, arkitekto ka pa rin. And so, saan nyo kailanganin yung PIC? That's another thing for us. Another day to discuss yung PIC na yan. Okay, dahil magkaiba. Okay, next. So let's talk this time yung mga nag-reacquire ng kanilang citizenship. And so here, a former Filipino professional who has reacquired Philippine citizenship pursuant to RA 9225, yan yung Philippine Citizenship Retention and Reacquisition Act of 2003. So, ang applicable na law ay yung RA 9225. May apply for PIC renewal, again, upon compliance with the requirements and conditions prescribed by PRC Resolution number 1225 series of 2020. So, wag niyong kalimutan. Baka meron na sa inyo gustong bumalik at gustong mag-retire ulit dito sa atin at want to reacquire your citizenship and intends to practice your profession here. And so you want to renew again your PIC, ang mga batas at issuances that governs this renewal of PIC is the RA number 9225 or Philippine Citizenship Retention and the Acquisition Act of 2003, and then the PRC Resolution number 1225 series of 2020. Yan ay last year ito nilabas. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, here is the procedure on the filing and processing of applications for PIC renewal. Now, also again, you have to, the applicant will have to apply at the Regulation and Registration Division with the following requirements. Number 1, yung kailangan ibigay kayo ng kopya ng Certificate of Reacquisition or Retention of Philippine Citizenship, which is issued by the Bureau of Immigration. So, meron yan when you reacquire, okay, your citizenship. Next slide. The other one is proof of membership to the accredited, integrated professional organization if mandated by the pertinent regulatory law. So, how will we apply this to you? Of course, as an architect under RA 9266, mandatory ang membership to the AYAPO. In our case, we look at AYAPOA because it's an integrated, accredited professional organization of architects. So, kailangan meron ka ngayon proof of membership. Kaya ibig sabihin, pag bumalik ka dito, nag-reacquire ka ng iyong citizenship, kailangan din mag-reacquire ka ng membership mo sa AYAPOA. No? You have to again secure a certificate of membership sa AYAPOA, the Integrated Accredited Professional Organization of Architects. Sino yung anong organization ang accredited and Integrated Accredited Professional Organization of Architects under the IRR of RA 9266, subject to renewal every 3 years, ay the United Architects of the Philippines. So I cited yung IRR of our law, RA 9266, at under the PRC modernization law, while the IRR of RA 9266 clearly stipulates by way of a resolution by the Board of Architecture, stated that the AYAPOA is UAP. Such accreditation as AYAPOA expires every 3 years, which means renewable every 3 years. So, of course, side na discussion lang para lang alam nyo. I know it may be of interest to you because ang organizer nito ay UAP, but chapter of Australia. Ang AYAPOA ay hindi lifetime na yung accreditation na binibigay sa isang organization, nagkakaroon ng expiration. And therefore, it had to be reapplied or renewed. Kaya, pwede na other organization can also apply to be an AYAPOA. No? Meron lang mga conditions under the PRC modernization law. So, any other OAS, Organization of Architects, upon the expiry of the current accredited professional organization can apply to become an AYAPOA, meaning for accredited, integrated, accredited professional organization for architects. So po pwede, no? Hindi yung hindi po pwede mag-apply. There was an issue na, of course, the Board of Architecture ay kinasuhan sa korte because of the resolution which part of the IRR of RA 9266 that but yun ay pinanalo ng Board of Architecture. Pinanalo ng Board of Architecture at the RTC at pinanalo rin ito sa Court of Appeals. So, valid, very valid yung resolution issued by the board then that the Integrated and Accredited Professional Organization of Architects is UAP, subject to renewal every 3 years. Okay? So, para maliwanag. Okay? So, kailangan, kaya, ngayon, member kayo ng UAP Australia, of course, obviously, you can easily comply with this. Kasi, member naman kayo ng accredited and integrated professional organizations of architects. The next one, proof of compliance with the CPD requirement. Sa ngayon, 15 points. Ang CPD, ang bilis, ang daling makuha. No? Ang CPD requirement, it's not that very difficult. Although, I must say that currently the CPD law is under scrutiny by both the Senate and the House of Representatives. There are bills filed in both houses, Congress and in the Senate, with the intention of amending, if not repealing, amending the CPD law. Of course, the pronouncement of the President of the Philippines is the President is keen of having it amended but not repealed. So yun, but who knows where will this go? But it's important that you are aware at this early time that the CPD law is under scrutiny of both houses for possible amendment of the law, if not repealed. Then another one is the copy of new oath professional. Ang ibig kasi sabihin yan is that when you want to renew your PIC, kailangan din manunumpa ulit kayo bilang professional. So, the copy of the new oath of professional have to be submitted also to LRD. Now, ang nagbibigay ng oath of professional ay walang iba kundi yung Board of Architecture. The next requirement, and then this is the proof of payment of the renewal fees, including applicable charges. Including applicable charges, yan ay may mga charges yan for kung hindi nare-renew yung PIC nyo for a number of years. But alam ko very negligible lang. Okay, next slide. I just hope that our participants and listeners are Filipinos. And if they are not Filipinos, I just hope they also can understand Tagalog or Filipino dahil kayo nagtataglis sa webinar natin na ito. Okay. But for those who are not Filipinos and do not understand our language, feel free to ask later on questions during the Q&A. At that time, I will speak through and through English. Hindi na ako magtaglis. Okay. Procedure, step number 2. We are still on the application for renewal of your PIC. Step 2 is that the LRD shall, upon verification of the documents submitted, will now process the application. Step 3, the same division will submit the accomplished service request form, or SRF, again to the ICTS DMSD for the exclusion of professionals' name in the database of former Filipino professionals. So, kanina, napansin nyo, ikaw ay isang Filipino na professional. Let's be very specific this time. You are a Filipino architect. You were given a certificate of registration and PIC, but you became a foreign citizen. You applied for SP. Diba? Nag-apply ka ng SP, isasama ka sa database ng mga former Filipino professionals. May listahan yun sa atin sa PRC. But pag bumalik ka na, nag-reacquire ka ng citizenship mo, you are now going to apply for the renewal of your PIC. so that you don't have to be using yung special permit. Instead, you now have to use again your PIC, yung hindi yung SP. Pag tatanggalin naman na ulit kasi baka nandun yung pangalan mo doon sa listahan ng mga former Filipino professionals. This time, when you apply for a PIC when you reacquired your citizenship, titignan ng ICT at kung may pangalan ka sa database ng mga former Filipino professionals, they will have to remove that in the database. Okay. Next slide. I think that's the end of that process, processing of renewal PIC. Now, I mentioned during our meeting with your chapter, yung leaders nyo. I'll just talk a little, an overview of the ASEAN architects as well as the APEC architects. Okay, for the ASEAN architects, there are now 113 Filipino ASEAN architects. We are second, number 2, no, sa ASEAN. Indonesia has the most number of ASEAN architects, followed by the Filipinos, and third is Singapore. So 139 na tayo. There were 130. Actually, if you look into the website of the ASEAN Architect Registry, makikita nyo 130 yon nakalista. But meron 9 na bagong approved na Filipino ASEAN architects. They are due for conferment this year. We're looking towards the end of the year to confer to them yung designation as Filipino ASEAN architect. Kaya 139 ang listahan pagdating sa PRC. 130 sa listahan ng ASEAN Architect Central Council Secretariat. Sa 139 Filipino ASEAN architects, merong isang Filipino na ASEAN architects who is a RFA. RFA means Registered Foreign Architect, and he is based in Singapore. Okay. For the entire ASEAN Architect Registry, for the whole ASEAN region, there are 10 countries, there is only one RFA. There is only one registered foreign architect. Isa. And it happens to be a Filipino, Architect Felipe, who is based in Singapore. Up to now, tayo lang, isang Filipino lang ang registered, accepted to practice his profession as an architect, and that is he is based in Singapore. So nasa listahan yan ng registered foreign architect sa Board of Architecture ng Singapore. Okay, next slide. Ano yung requirements to become a ASEAN architect? Let's just do it quick. 5 years of architectural program. Tapos ka ng BS Architecture. Obviously, pagtapos ka sa Pilipinas, authorized by CHED. Then you have a PRC Certificate of Registration and Professional Identification Card, which entitles you to practice architecture in the Philippines. And then you have acquired practical diversified architectural experience of not less than 10 years, of 10 years of continuous experience after graduation, and 5 years of which, out of that 10 years, as a registered and licensed architect. So, only means that pwede ka maging ASEAN architect 10 years after your graduation. And Of that 10 years, you have been continuously practicing your profession, 5 years of which must be after your passing the examination, at least 5 years. Okay. Ang ibig sabihin, sa ating kasi in the Philippines, dito ang tawag natin is 5 years BS of Architecture, 5 plus 2, 2 years of DAE, the Diversified Architectural Experience. And so, 2, meaning 2 years, yung after graduation mo, it follows that there is an 8 years of continuous practice of your profession after your board examination. Pero kung nag-delay ka, inabot yung DAE mo ng 5 years, ibig sabihin yan, you still need another 5 years more after your board exam bago ka pwede ma-qualify as an ASEAN architect. Next slide, please. The other requirement is at least 2 years in responsible choice of significant architectural works within that 5 years of professional architectural practice. So, ang sinasabi, kung yung 5 years na experience mo, application of your being an architect, yung practice ng iyong profession, out of that 5, kailangan 2 taon dyan ay involved ka sa mga significant architectural works. Yung significant architectural works, makikita nyo yan sa MRA. May listahan yon kung ilang square meters na ganito, ilang square meter yung commercial, ilang hectares yung subdivision development, naka-define yan under the MRA. So, but hindi ko na isinama dito because for those who will be interested to become ASEAN architect, you can contact the ASEAN Architects Special Committee at sila yun naman ang mag-seminar sa inyo. The other one is complied with the CPD program, has no record of serious violation on technical, professional, ethical standards, be it local or international, for the practice of architecture. Next one, next slide. Okay, so let's talk of the APEC architects. Sa APEC architects, by the way, before I go to the APEC architects, yung ASEAN, I think alam natin na yun yung Association Southeast Asian Nations, kaya ASEAN yun. There are 10 countries. Siguro hindi ko na kailangan enumerate yung 10 countries yan. Pwede nyo yung i-google. Google nyo na lang kung alin yung 10 yan. But obviously, it's Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, plus Brunei, Myanmar, and the rest. Pwede nyo i-google. How about the APEC architects? APEC architects, of course, as you would note, it is the Asia Pacific Economic Council. So here, membership here are economies in the countries. Hindi sinasabi na mga gobyerno ang membro. Instead, these are economies. In the ASEAN, ang members dyan are countries. Our government are signatory to the MRA. That's why ang recognition ng ASEAN is considered recognized by our governments, the 10 countries. Yung governments of the 10 countries of the ASEAN recognizes the MRA. APEC architects is not. So APEC architects project, that's why we call this APEC architects project. Yung ASEAN is, we call it ASEAN Architects Registry, but for APEC, we call it APEC Architects Projects. Hindi ito, walang MRA nito na pirmado ng ating mga gobyerno, ang ating gobyerno. So, while the ASEAN MRAs are considered international agreement by our governments, APEC architects is not. And that's why ang ginagawa is that members economies of APEC architect projects nagkakaroon ng mga bilateral agreements. or multilateral agreements so that they become binding in the eyes of our government. So as far as EPEC architects are concerned, again, you can look into what makes up the Asia-Pacific Economic Council. And there are 64 Filipino EPEC architects currently. So mas konti yung EPEC architects kaysa yung ASEAN architects. Ang EPEC Architects Council, they meet once every 2 years. So that could be the reason, although mas nauna yung APEC architects na established. While the ASEAN Architects Council, they meet no less than 3 times a year, which means 6 times compared to one meeting against the APEC Architects Central Council. Once every 2 years lang ang APEC, while 3 times every year minimum ang ASEAN architects. Next slide. Requirements for APEC architect. Mapapansin nyo mas madali ang magiging APEC architect kumpara sa ASEAN. The same, you are a registered architect in your home country, 7 years. Ang completed period of professional practice after initial registration in the participating economy have gained the experience in the following. Of course, we know, kabisado natin ito bilang mga arkitekto: preliminary studies, preparations of briefs, design, contract documents, administration. Next slide. Now, at least 3 years of the 7-year period must be undertaken as an architect with sole professional responsibility for design, documentation, and contract administration of buildings of moderate complexity. Again, the moderate complexity is defined under the APEC guidelines and standards. Now, as a collaborating architect, so if you are in collaboration and not yung sole responsibility, sole responsible architect, if you are collaborating with other architects, then it has to be as architect in charge and professional responsible for significant aspects of the design. Part ka ng significant aspect ng design. You need not be the only one, but you are part of the team on design, documentation, contract administration of this time complex building. So kung hindi sole responsible sa design, you are part of a team, kailangan complex na yung building. Again, complex are enumerated in the standards and guidelines of the APEC architect project. Next slide. Okay. Yun na yung inaantay ninyo. Thank you. And that's my presentation. Okay,
Thank you. And thank you very much, Architect Robert. Ayun, Yehe, pwede pa tayo mag-practice basta may special permit.
Yes.
Yes.
You are welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you po. So we will be posting the procedure for the application of the special permit and the application for the PIC renewal in our Facebook page on the upcoming days. I know most of us can't wait to have our questions addressed. So without further ado, let's give the floor to Architect Jeff Roque to facilitate the question and answer portion. Architect Jeff.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you. First and foremost, thank you to Architect Mangyo and Architect Zach for the wonderful talks you delivered to us. So for those who have questions, type them up in the comments or chat box below as we start this part of the webinar. And since we're running out of time, I'll just ask 3 questions for our speakers, and the other questions that will not be asked will be consolidated and addressed to them, and their answers will be posted on our Facebook page. So without further ado, the first question is for Architect Nestor Mangyo. So what is the advantage and disadvantage of design and build to the client?
Very good question. In a design build services, the client only talks to one person and doesn't talk to the contractor, architect, or project manager, but it is at the same time. No, this I've experienced in when my client was President Ramos. He was still the president, and so maybe he didn't really want to talk to several people, so he contacted me, and I was able to build his house. Also, it is also doing away with the bidding process so that the project can be implemented immediately. So if the owner gives you a budget for a project you are designing, probably you can use that amount to be the budget for the construction. So you can already tailor your design how to meet that budget of the client. And change order will be easy to decide instead of passing through several engineers for the evaluation and estimate. It is easier decided between you and just the client. Those are the advantages for having a design built for a client. But there are also disadvantages. This disadvantage for a client is that if the architect is not honest in his profession, he can easily downgrade the design and specification to earn more profit. So I think you know very well that we have a code of ethics. We are responsible and accountable not only to God but also to our client and also to our family. So that is the advantage of a design and build for a client.
Okay, thank you, Architect Mangyo.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I add something
Yes.
to what Architect Mangyo said?
Yes, sir.
This is very interesting for me because this design and build is becoming a headache for the Board of Architecture. But I will distinguish the kind of DBS Architect Mangyo had mentioned. I said that because, you know, sa Board of Architecture ngayon, ang mga kaso na we are handling and hearing are practically most of them. Isa lang ang kaso that pertains to conduct and becoming of a professional involving design. The rest ng lahat ng kaso ay architects involving themselves using dual hat, dalawang sombrero. They are the architects and at the same time they are the builders. Now, in the DBS, binanggit na Architect Mangyo, he mentioned this is the universal understanding or interpretation of the DBS. Isa lang ang kausap, ito ay yung contractor. And that the contractor in the DBS need not be a professional, but it is the obligation of the contractor now to hire his design professionals. So yan yung universal understanding of the design and build. And it is as provided for under the Philippine Procurement Law. Ang problema natin, at yun yung nagkakaroon ng problema sa ngayon because architects like us, especially in those small practice, because yung binabanggit ni Architect Mangyo na design and build involves big value project, malalaking halaga. But yung mga problema ngayon sa mga arkitekto undertaking DBS because they misunderstand what DBS really mean, involving contracts of 3 million, 5 million pesos. In fact, most of those cases filed in the Board of Architecture involves less than 10 million. Yung binabanggit na Architect Mangyo involves several millions talaga. And so, it is sometimes mistaken and misunderstood by many of us architects, Filipino architects, that the DBS, as universally accepted and interpreted, is equal to what we call design and build by administration under UAP-SPP. I think this is 207, if I recall right the exact document. And so doon nagkakagulo. An architect entering into contract with the client who also act as the general contractor is not allowed. It is basically in the decisions rendered by the board, conduct ang becoming a professional, yung gano'n. Arkitekto ka, and then ikaw din yung general contractor na iisa ang document na hawak mo. If you like to go into that, you should have two different documents. You are a licensed architect, and yet you still have a license as a contractor. Pero yung arkitekto ka lang using your license as architect, doing the work of a general contractor is not allowed. Marami nang dinesisyonan ng board na guilty ang mga professionals, not only in our professions, but in other professions involving the building design professionals. Kasi nagkakaroon ng conflict of interest. So, ingatan natin, because when we talk yung sa DBS, by administration under our SPP in UAP, is not the same as the DBS prescribed as one of the mode of delivery. Pagdating sa procurement law at saka yung universally accepted definition of design and build. So I think this is another subject matter siguro, Architect Mangyo, that we'll have to get involved educating our fellow architects on this difference of design and build as mentioned by Architect Mangyo and the design and build as provided for under our UAP SPP. Magkaiba yan.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why precisely I exercise two professions in my dealings. One as an architect, and we have an architectural services contract. And then, of course, as a contractor, of which I am licensed to undertake. But what the chairman is saying, design and by administration is also legal to be practiced by the architects. Am I right, Chairman?
Yes, yes, allowed. Yung design and build by administration. Ang hindi na allow is that kasi yun ang problema, Architect Mangyo, sa mga kapwa natin, especially those in small practice, mga baguhan na kapwa natin arkitekto, the way they write their agreement, very obvious that the role of the architects, obviously, not only the architect, but he is a general contractor without license as a contractor. Iba yung the way our service agreement is written na valid pagdating sa UAP SPP 207. Kaya mag-iingat, sundan nyo yung how we should write our service agreement under the UAP SPP 207 for design and build, but not the way na maraming may kaso sa Board of Architecture, because the way they write their contracts, maliwanag na dalawa yung dinadala nilang identity, yet they only have one license to speak of, and that is their license to practice their professional service.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, Architect Sak and Architect Mangyo. So for the next question we have for Architect Sak, are the procedures and in filing and processing of the issuance of the special permit can be done online or electronically, especially if the applicant is in overseas?
Yeah, the way I understand, by now, I have not checked recently kung hanggang saan na inabot yung digitalization of the processes of sa PRC. But that is the direction. I just don't know kung inabot na ba nila dyan yung ganon online application. I can assure you that renewal of the PIC, yes, pero yung application for STP, I'm not yet sure.
Okay, thank
Or
you.
application for SP. We can check that. I can check that after this webinar, and I will communicate this to your chapter kung online na rin ba yung application ng STP or yung SP.
Okay, thank you, Architect Sak. Next question is for Architect Mangyo. So we would like to know, how do we address the embodied carbon footprint as an architect in the Philippines?
Well, to reduce the carbon footprint in our environment and reduce the pressure on this planet, we have to design the principles of green building. That is using recycled materials and reducing as much as possible the use of concrete, so that we can reduce the use of fossilized energy. Of course, recycling, normally water, you can recycle rain, the use of permeable surfaces so that when the rain comes, water seeps into the ground. And also the use of lighter materials so that we can still reduce the use of concrete. Right now, in one of our projects, I introduce the use of, they call it AAC block, which is a lighter blocks and bigger in size, but it doesn't use any more concrete mortars and plastering. So it's cleaner and less wastage, and we reduce the use of mortar concrete. Of course, you have to look for alternative source of energy. I can see some buildings that are already roofed with solar panels, the glass that filter the heat from the outside. And also, I see some buildings that install wind power in their buildings to energize them. So we can also reduce carbon footprint by using alternative energy. Of course, we have to design mixed-use development so that, and pedestrian-friendly and walkable cities or communities, so that we can reduce the use of cars, lesser travel, or encourage walking. Therefore, again, lessening the use of fossilized energy. So I think, of course, recycling materials is a must in reducing carbon footprint on our planet.
Okay, thank you, Architect Mangyo. Next question is for Architect Robert Sack. If the returning Filipino professional who reacquired his Filipino citizenship, in reacquiring his PIC license for practice, will there be a back due for IAPOA or Certificate of Good Standing and for PRC ID renewals?
You will note that it is stated there may mga surcharges. So it's obvious may mga penalties yun. How much, I honestly don't know. Pagdating sa IAPOA, in my also understanding, meron. But UAP from time to time nagbibigay ng absolution. I can't recall the exact term. But yes, I think meron din surcharges yan. But for PRC, it's being a government na minimal lang yan. Very minimal.
Okay, thank you, Architect Sack. So last question for Architect Mangyo. As the global pandemic have affected the way people work for commercial project and offices, is the pathway to practicing in the Philippines still better done by approaching the local government to be involved in projects? And what type of projects will flourish in the short-term foreseeable future?
We're lucky that in this time of pandemic, what kept the economy going is really the projects of the government, the build projects that was budget of about almost 8 trillion for a period of 6 years. So they spent about over 1 trillion every year. So what are the projects that were brought up by this project of the government? There's a lot of private-public partnership on the expressways, but all these expressways gave way to priming real estate development near their stations, which we call transit-oriented development. No? And many of these are township development. And in the township, the opportunities for architects, there's a lot from commercial, residential, and industrial buildings. Industrial estates are doing very well this year, this time of pandemic, because of e-commerce. E-commerce needs warehouses, logistic companies for deliveries. And then because of agri and requirement, there's a need for cold storage structures and also offices for telecommunication and media companies. So even in this time of pandemics, there are opportunities and that a building that thrives during this time, like also the hospital and the healthcare and clinics, healthcare facilities. Also manufacturing of pharmaceutical products and also essential goods. Even affordable housing is thriving during this time of pandemic, because definitely if you are working from home and studying from home, you need a house. And it's good that countryside, anywhere now, you can do those things, even in the countryside. So warehouses are even more affordable. So even retail, although some malls are closed, there has been a need now for open air retail, or like the restaurants, they're more selling on al fresco dining outdoors. So a lot are still doing projects. A lot of our architects and even dormitories are also very much in demand now for offices. Although the office building has declined in has increased in their vacancy from before pandemic, there was only 3% that are vacant in our offices building, but now it has gone up to about 12.5%, mostly because the POGOs, or the Philippine Overseas Gaming Operators, have went back to China, and there's less BPOs now. But I heard also lately that BPOs are coming back and the POGOs are coming back, and so next year we will see again a resurgence of office buildings.
Okay, thank you, Architect Mangya, sir. Next question is for Architect Sak. Is there any program or upcoming procedure from the PRC in regards to the ease of renewal of RPIC, since we are in a situation that returning home is quite improbable for the time being?
Yeah, in fact, we received numerous messages by way of the social media that especially on yung mga satellite offices of ng PRC, it takes only about minutes to be able to renew. But currently, as we know it, because of the pandemic, basically everybody are filing basically online yung applications. And so ang PRC cannot operate 100%. Many times 30% lang ang operation, ang staff na reporting, even below that. So medyo yung sa online application ang medyo humahaba. But kasi lahat yan ay ni-schedule na through online, dahil ang mga offices sa ngayon hindi 100% operational. But my answer to you is yes, because basically the application should be 3 steps lang naman: filing, processing, and then issuance.
Okay.
Yung filing madali, yung processing yung medyo mabigat. Of course, issuance napakabilis kasi online din naman.
Yep. Thank you, Architect Sak. Oh, sir, we're gonna extend like the Q&A for 5 more minutes. So one more question for Architect Nestor Mangyo. Tell us your insights about the advantage of having projects in collaboration with foreign Filipino architects.
In the Philippines, we see a lot of projects with collaboration with foreign architects. No, it is a known fact that some of our architect friends abroad, especially in advanced countries, they have more, they're advanced in design solutions and technology. But if we take them here to collaborate with us, we should work for transfer of technology and learn from them so that we can gain from the knowledge. Like you, as I was mentioning before, Filipinos working abroad, you try to make the most out of it, because when you come back here, you'll be bringing, we call it brain drain to the country. And a lot of these successful architects here, practitioners, mostly had experience working abroad. So while you are there, take the most out of it, learn from your projects, and bring home the technology to your country.
Okay, thank you, Architect Mangyo. Another question for Architect Zach. Is there any chance that the validity of our professional identification card will be extended for 5 or 10 years?
Since the question is there any chance? Of course, there's always chance. The reason also is that there are ongoing discussions tungkol dyan. If we can, or we are supposed to extend the validity from 3 to 5. So yung tanong na, is there any chance? There is. Can this materialize? Honestly, I don't know. That I cannot answer.
Okay, thank you. So for the other questions that have not been asked, we will consolidate them and address it to our speakers, and their answers will be posted on our Facebook page. So I think that's the end of our question and answer portion. So to conclude this part, in behalf of the United Architects of the Philippines Australia chapter, we would like to greet Architect Robert Sack a belated happy birthday, and we wish you all the best in your career.
Thank you.
Yes, happy birthday, Sir Robert. May na-prepare daw si Architect Jeff na song and dance number.
Ay,
So,
wala!
Architect Jeff.
Wala! Song lang, walang dance.
Ayun, may song pala, Sir. Ayun.
Song lang, happy birthday. Joke.
Ayan. So, thank you very much, Architect Robert and
Thank you also. Thank you.
Architect Mangyo, for the very engaging Q&A portion. So for everyone who are not able to receive their answers, we have collected your questions and we will be posting the answer in a Facebook post in a couple of days. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our chapter president, Architect Hazel Aguilar. Architect Hazel.
Yeah, hello.
Parang nakamute ata si Hazel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Hazel.
Yes.
Should you proceed with the certificate, Sarah, for the next slide? So UAP Australia presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Architect Nestor S. Mangyo, FUAP, a senior architect, APEC architect, in grateful recognition of his unwavering support and sharing his invaluable knowledge during the remote practice, insights on the architecture practice in the Philippines for Filipinos abroad, given on this 21st of August, Year of our Lord, at 2 p.m. Philippine time, 4 p.m. Australia, and 6 p.m. in New Zealand, held through Zoom video communications. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Hazel.
And UAP Australia chapter presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Architect Robert S. Sack, FUAP, as an architect and APEC architect, in grateful recognition of his unwavering support and sharing his invaluable knowledge during the remote practice, insights on the architecture practice in the Philippines for Filipinos abroad, given on this 21st of August, Year of our Lord, 2 p.m. Philippine time, 4 p.m. Australia, and 6 p.m. in New Zealand, held through Zoom video communications.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My fellow architects, we have reached the end of our webinar, and as we close, it is a privilege to be entrusted in such an undertaking at a gathering of such eminent architects from different parts of the world who joined us today. As with all such events, this webinar has been an outstanding example where our minds have been assailed by a torrent of ideas, information, interpretations, and visions, and it will probably be a day or two before we can sift through them all and consolidate our own personal perspectives. On behalf of UAP Australia chapter, I would like to thank our speakers for today, Architect Robert Sack and Architect Nestor Mangio. Their presence has been invaluable and without any doubt has helped make this webinar a great success. As this webinar is catered and tailored for Filipinos working and living overseas, it has been an outstanding avenue where we all have learned about remote practice, current opportunities, and how we as foreign practitioners and or foreign Filipinos are still able to cross the verge in Philippine building industry. It is very significant that the views expressed here are disseminated to a wider audience, and clearly this webinar has been in very capable hands. We greatly appreciate the support we have received from every one of you present in this event, and I'm personally grateful to all those who have been involved and the people behind this seminar who spent time and effort to see this through. My fellow architects, since UAP Australia is striving to host regular webinars and trainings, we look forward to seeing you all again in our next event. And for those who want to join UAP Australia chapter, please email us at info.uap.aunz@gmail.com. Stay safe, everyone, and God